What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you another Pillars of Eternity lore video, this time about the subject of Animancy. So we're going to talk about what Animancy is, what it's used for, all that stuff. But first things first, gonna be a few spoilers here and there for some of the Pillars of Eternity games, so just kind of keep that in mind. Not really trying to avoid spoilers as I go through the video, just kind of talking about relevant things as it comes up. This is primarily going to affect the first game more so than the second one, but there will be a couple of minor things for the second game as well. But with that out of the way, let's just jump right into this. To sum up Animancy very quickly, it is simply the study of soul energy using machinery to help manipulate those souls. But because I want this video to be a bit longer than a minute, we're going to go over that in a little more detail. However, the basics of Animancy is just that, using machinery and things to manipulate souls and their energy through Adra, as well as other means. Now, the people who practice Animancy are known as Animancers. They are often kind of like tinkerer types, as the practice of Animancy often requires the use of technology, which requires Animancers to then know how to fix that technology, so you see a lot of the tinkerer types. And then you also get your sort of mad scientist types, as Animancy is constantly pushing the bounds of what is possible. Now, the games take place in an interesting point in history when it comes to Animancy, because the last 100 years or so from the point of the games has been a bit of a golden age for Animancy. And while it is often legal to pursue it, it's often looked down upon, or shied away from common folk, and in some ways is often very much so viewed as necromancy, because for all the good Animancy can do, it can also cause horrible monstrosities. And because of this, Animancers are often mistrusted, and they typically move away from rural areas to escape the prosecution that would come with that, because people in those areas often just label them as necromancers and kill them. So as we've discussed in the last couple of videos, which I highly recommend you watch if you want some of the full context of some of this stuff, but the basics of it is that when a person dies, their soul travels to the in-between, which is a sort of shadow realm, before traveling into the Adra pillars, which then takes that soul to what would be this world's version of the afterlife. In between those steps, souls can be manipulated through this machinery that Animancers have made, and it can then be used to do a variety of things. And one of the key parts of both of the games, really, is the exploration of the ethical issues posed by doing this, which is why a lot of people see it as necromancy, because these are essentially the souls of the dead. But it gets a little more complicated there, and I want to call this out specifically because in the world of Eora, souls are reincarnated. That's the natural process. There's never more or less souls. They just get reincarnated constantly into new people. So just something to keep in mind there, especially when we start talking about the concept of soul maladies. So one of the big things Animancy can do is cure things that are called awakenings or just general insanity, weird character flaws, stuff like that is the kind of thing Animancy can be used for, as well as some other stuff that we'll get into. But when it comes to the soul maladies specifically, Animancy is explored as a way of fixing those. Now, one of the more common ones that comes up in the games is something called an awakening. Now, as I mentioned, all the souls get reincarnated. However, what happens when a person living their life suddenly remembers their past lives? That's called an awakening. And basically, it can drive a person insane as the various aspects of that person's soul start fighting each other. That's the kind of thing Animancy seeks to fix, or at least help alleviate. Now, as Animancers start exploring what they can do with Adra, which is the physical container for souls as they travel to the beyond, they're starting to find all sorts of things. In Pillars of Eternity 2, we find out that they've found a way to distill this into a drink that is used as a panacea for basically every problem. However, it's known to cause awakenings and can potentially drive people insane. So there's good versus bad that Animancy can achieve for people. And a lot of the ethical back and forth about using Animancy crops up especially when people start trying to graft souls back into living bodies. Because that's primarily where you get undead, or vessels, as they are often called in this universe. So when an Animancer, or anybody really, takes a soul and puts it back into a body, say that it just recently left, it will reanimate that body, but it's undead at that point. The body is still dead. And this can cause all sorts of monsters. And this is essentially necromancy, right? No real beating around the bush for that one. But the alternative to that is that souls can be put into constructs And when they're in a construct, they actually never regain their full personality, if you will. But it will give life to that construct, and then they can be used as guards and warriors and things like that. And we see that a lot throughout the games. That's where we get a lot of the steel-clad constructs and everything. Now, there's a couple more things I want to talk about, and one of the big ones is the Hollowborn crisis. So the Hollowborn crisis is a big part of the plot in the first game. And without getting into the specifics of it, basically, kids are being born without souls, which means they're a husk of a person. Like, the lights are on, but nobody's home. So Animancers, being in their prime, really, at the time, seek to try to solve this problem. And one of the things they settled on, because if you just put a human soul back into a Hollowborn, it just drives it crazy. The soul almost always awakens immediately, and it ends badly for everyone. So what they tried to do instead was put animal souls into these children. And believe it or not, it actually seemed to work until that child hits puberty, at which point they go basically feral, and this gives us a form of vessel called a wight, or a wicht. I honestly don't know how to pronounce it. It's like W-I-C-H-T. And at that point, they're just a full-blown monster. But for the first decade or so of that child's life, it's going to be a normal child. The thinking being that an animal's soul, which has less personality just by the very nature of it, could have eventually been overridden, so to speak, by the child, thus giving it a chance to grow into its own soul, as they tried to say. So that ended horribly, which caused a lot of friction with the Animancers and, of course, the people of the Deerwood where that game takes place. So that's one of the more notable, holy crap, this is really bad moments for Animancers, despite all the good they had done and how they've been addressing things like awakenings. So another thing to keep in mind is that Eora has people called Watchers. Watchers are people who have been shown the in-between, and now they can always see it, which basically means that the Watcher can kind of interact with the world's shadow world known as the in-between, and thus see the souls that are there and talk to them, which positions Watchers to uniquely solve a lot of problems. And because of their ability to interact with souls this way, Watchers and Animancers kind of go hand in hand with each other. However, Watchers are rare. They're not necessarily impossible to find, but they're not an everyday occurrence by any means. So Animancers are often looking for Watchers to help them with their research. And it just so happens the main character of both the games is the Watcher, specifically the Watcher of Cadnua, as the games call you, but Pillars of Eternity 1 to Pillars of Eternity 2, you are the same person. And as Animancy progresses, all sorts of things are being discovered about it. And one thing I want to leave you guys with is in Pillars of Eternity 2, Animancers actually discover a way to teleport a person from one Audra pillar to another Audra pillar, effectively facilitating teleportation between places that have Audra pillars, which is a pretty cool development. But there you go, guys. There is a look at Animancy and some of its practical uses in the world of Eora. I certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.